Well, ladies and gentlemen, our first on point. What's really happening with Donald Trump as he calls for a coalition of navies? As the war between the United States, Israel and Iran intensifies, the Strait of Hormuz is at the center of a global security debate. President Donald Trump is now pushing for an international naval coalition to secure one of the world's most critical energy routes. The proposal is simple in principle, but extremely complex in practice. Donald Trump wants major oil importing nations to deploy warships to escort commercial tankers passing through the narrow Strait of Hormuz, a waterway through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply moves every day. But the response from America's own allies, from even NATO countries, has been quite muted. Several countries are now hesitating to send their navies into what is effectively an active war zone. They fear that escort missions could drag them directly into a confrontation with Iran. Well, could this be a deterrence or provocation? That's one aspect that we're really going to be looking at. But Trump says countries that depend on Gulf energy must also help protect the route.
Probably heard in Iran, very strong results militarily, results. We're talking to countries about policing the straits because they are the ones, we don't get oil, very little, 1%, 2%. And China, as an example, gets about 90% of its oil from the Hormuz Strait. And nice to have other countries police that with us, and we'll help. We'll work with them militarily. As far as I'm concerned, we've essentially defeated Iran. I guess they can have a little bit of fight back, but not much. Not much. So we've taken out their air forces. We've taken out their air defense. There's no air defense whatsoever. We've taken out their leadership times 2 or 3, might be 3, we'll find out soon. But militarily it's been amazing. We attacked Karg Island and we left just the one little area standing, and the standing part is where they have the pipes, all the oil pipes come in. And we can do that on 5 minutes notice. We have it all locked and loaded and ready to go if we want to do it. We chose not to do it. I chose not to do it yet. We'll see what happens. They want to negotiate. They want to negotiate badly. I don't think they're ready. Just on what I'm hearing, they want to negotiate badly, as they should. But I don't think they're ready to do what they have to do. But I think they will be ready at some point. But we're doing very well with respect to that whole situation in Iran. We are talking to other countries about.
The truth is, even long-standing allies are taking a very cautious approach. Japan, one of the world's biggest energy importers, has made it clear that it is not rushing to deploy naval forces into the Gulf. Tokyo says it is still assessing the situation and the risks involved. China has gone on to say it is still assessing and that all countries are responsible to ensure safe passage. Let's listen into what the Japanese Prime Minister has said.
が求められておりませんので、仮定のことにはお答えしにくうございます。日本政府として必要な対応を行う方法を現在検討中です。もちろん日本の法律の範囲内でございますけれども、どのように日本関係船舶およびその乗員の命を守っていくか、何ができるかということを検討中でございます。
Well, Germany says this is not our war. We did not start it.
I think we are not very close to that, not at all. I mean, we have a situation which we did not provoke, which we don't cause at all. This war started without any consultations before. We have a big responsibility, a very important responsibility for the eastern flank and the high north, as I mentioned earlier, and we stay committed to that, but we can't be anywhere on the world and we can't be at every place to support a war which we didn't start. So it is about to find ways to solve the situation diplomatically.
The challenge, analysts say, is geography and strategy. The Strait of Hormuz is barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, making ships extremely vulnerable to missiles, drones, sea mines, and fast attack boats. Iran has spent decades preparing precisely for this kind of asymmetric naval warfare in the Gulf, which means even a large multinational naval coalition could find it extremely difficult to guarantee safe passage. That's just one part of it. The cost and the threat is the other. So the big question really is, can Donald Trump build a global coalition to keep the Strait of Hormuz open? More importantly, is this really sharing security threats or the risk assessment? I'm being joined at this point by Meera Shankar, the former ambassador to USA, Commodore Anil Jay Singh, who's a vice president, Indian Maritime Foundation, also Air Commodore Ashminder Singh Bahal, who's a defense and geopolitical expert. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining me. Well, straight to you, Meera Shankar, who would know the heart of United States, the spirit and mind better than you at this point. A very simple question that I want to ask. Is this Donald Trump trying to mitigate or share the security threats, or is he trying to really share the risk at this point?
I think it's a question of sharing the risk at this point, because the Strait of Hormuz is closed and very few ships are getting through. Iran has said it'll allow Chinese ships to load and pass through the straits. Iran has allowed 2 Indian ships to pass, but has insisted that it's not a blanket permission for Indian ships and that India will need to negotiate for each vessel that it seeks, safe passage for. But, the Europeans, Trump's greatest concern is that the price of oil is going up. It's over $103 a barrel. And that hits him politically in the United States. Because a major plank of his political platform was that he's going to reduce the price of goods and lower inflation, and that he'll do it, immediately. But if oil rises significantly for a substantial period of time, then Trump's platform gets skewed. As it is, polls show that almost 60% or more of Americans do not support the war. So then, he faces difficulty. So keeping the Strait of Hormuz open, he also has said, is not really his responsibility, because he gets hardly any oil from this region. It's the countries which get the most oil which should assume responsibility. But the point is that his NATO allies are worried. As the German foreign minister said, this is not a war that they started, and they can't suddenly be told to become parties to it and bear the consequences of the action which they have not taken. Secondly, there's very tenuous basis in international law. It's for what the Israelis and the Americans have done, because they just went in, even as talks were going on and on the nuclear issue, and were making progress. So they didn't either consult their NATO partners, they didn't have any NATO resolution, there was no resolution from the UN, and it's only as an afterthought that they said, we attacked Iran because otherwise Iran was going to attack us. Now, there's no evidence that Iran was going to attack, because they were engaged in constructive talks at that very moment. I think the other major concern for European countries in particular is that this deflects attention away from Ukraine. And America, as it is, has been weakening its support on the Ukrainian front. So the Europeans are having to absorb the cost of actually supporting Ukraine against Russia and preventing its collapse.
Right.
So as a result, many European countries would be very loath to get involved in a theater far away, which would mean that their resources and attention get deflected away from Ukraine. And finally, within their own countries, I'm not sure that they're getting embroiled in a wider conflict in the Gulf would be politically popular. In fact, if you recall Tony Blair's career, it spelt the death knell of his career when
Absolutely.
he
In fact,
actually sided fully with the US in
and
Iraq.
Meera Shankar, not to forget the fact that I think possibly for the first time in decades, US and UK have had a fallout. They've possibly been the closest of brothers in some of the most toughest of times, and they have had a fallout unprecedented in a lot number of decades for that matter. We'll just get to that in a bit, but Ashminder Singh Behel, if I can come to you at this point. One, Meera Shankar just spoke about how countries will not want to get into a coalition of navies at this point. But the other part is what Iran's doing, the kind of response that Iran has given. Many people saying that US or Donald Trump did not calculate the risk of what they were getting into. If at all there were countries to position their navies in the Strait of Hormuz, there's also an underlying worry about more than deterrence. This may be seen as a provocation.
Absolutely, Sineha. You come out with a very nice point. America has already lost the perception war. And the aura of invisibility that America had, wherever it went, that just go and get inside, pick up a president and bring him back to America. That kind of a feeling is gone from the world. From the world, people used to expect America to be the stabilizer, to be the protector. That is not happening now. And most of the countries which are part of the NATO, they have suffered his America First policy, his allies being treated like dirt and calling names to even stammer, and many other, even Macron or other leaders, world leaders. So they are not very keen. There is a coolness about them. But the most important aspect is the worry that if it provokes and if they actually send their own vessels there, like 2 frigates can come from France, but it is only for Aspides operation. So probably it may get more limited to the Red Sea than anywhere else. Now, what even Germany has said, no going to Straits of Hormuz. So what I want to highlight here is why are people worried? Europe's 3.8% oil and gas only comes from the Straits of Hormuz. So they are not affected. Then who is affected? China, 38%. And China is already getting a free passage. India, 40%. India is getting a free passage. The two countries that get very badly affected are Japan, 68%, as well as South Korea, and also Pakistan and Bangladesh and smaller countries. They're getting very badly affected. But last thing I want to say on this is that the Straits of Hormuz, which is just 33 kilometers wide, has a proper area to carry out their asymmetric naval warfare strategy, where you have 3 islands called Keshem, Hormuz, and Larak, which are just 2.5 kilometers to 18 kilometers from Bandar Abbas, which have underwater tunnels where you have 12-meter tunnels, and from drone aerial warfare to ballistic missile, to like Fatah, to cruise missiles, to underwater drones, to drone boats, to the mines which are prefabricated mines, as well as fast attack crafts which are at Larak. So when you have swarms of this coming in, whichever armada may be coming, it doesn't have maneuvering space. With the coastal batteries opening up, there'll be large-scale death and destruction of the system. So you have to either suppress the Iranian system, which is extremely tough to do it in a short period of time. And when they start doing it, even then, even if you remember Afghanistan war, one person with a shoulder-fired weapon could keep the Russian helicopters away, which carried troops from one place to another. So it is going to be something like that. And America knows, and that is the reason why, even when it is getting USS Tripoli, he is not very keen to go through these 3 island chain. So even if he occupies Kirk Island, the Straits of Hormuz still remain closed. And Kirk Island is only the economic vein of Iran. And then it crosses the red line, and Iran unleashes terror in all the South Gulf countries.
You know, Ashminder Singh, where you just mentioned about the fact that how US seems to be losing the battle of narratives or perceptions, as it were. Donald Trump has repeatedly said that the military of Iran has completely been destroyed, the navy has been destroyed whatsoever. If for whatever he is claiming, the fact is now you have the Sajal missiles which have been launched, the dancing missiles, as it were, many saying it's being launched for the first time perhaps in this whole battle. For whatever it is, for a country like US to claim that Iran is completely destroyed, let me get in at this point, Commodore Anil Jai Singh. You're the Vice President for the Indian Maritime Foundation. How much of this, of what's happening in Hormuz, can really be controlled by navies in an era where it's about diplomacy and geopolitics? India clearly showing the way.
You know, this whole, thank you for having me on your show, but this whole issue now is about this coalition that President Trump wants to create, and the hesitation on the part of the countries he has requested to become part of any such coalition to escort ships from the Hormuz. Because as the German foreign minister clearly said, it's not their war. They were not consulted before it was started. And the problem with President Trump, as I see it, is firstly, he went into this war without an end state. Nobody knew what he wanted at the end of the war. He just went into the war. But the kind of statements he's been making, despite it's quite evident that America needs help with the Straits of Hormuz now. They are really at the wit's end as to how to control the Straits of Hormuz. And they know that notwithstanding the fact, as he says, that we only take 1% of oil from here, China takes 90%. Well, if that were the case, China would have done something about it. If he takes only 1% of oil from the Straits of Hormuz, why has the price of fuel gone up by 70 cents a gallon in the US? Which, as Ambassador Meera Shankar said, is going to be political harakiri for him if he's not able to control the prices of oil and gas, etc., in the US. So obviously he's in a bit of a corner at the moment. Iran is not going to step down, and we don't know what are the asymmetric capabilities of Iran, as Ashminder brought out, that they are yet to unleash on ships over here. They haven't done very much. They've actually been absolutely absent as far as the Navy is concerned. We haven't seen any naval action actually happening in the Straits of Hormuz. Other than now they claim they've got mines. Mines are probably the most effective form of undersea warfare, the cheapest and most effective, particularly in restricted waters. Why would navies send their ships into a narrow waterway like the Straits of Hormuz, where while it may be 33 kilometers wide, but the actual passage from which ships pass is much narrower. If those waters are mined and not adequately mine swept, every ship passing through those waters, warship or otherwise, is at danger. So there is always a risk of unintended escalation happening.
Okay.
And then, controlling the escalation matrix will become a very big challenge for any of the countries who get involved in this. Iran could play their cards very smartly. Keep letting the countries which are really dependent on oil continue to get their oil, like Harshminder said, India, China, perhaps Japan. None of these countries would join any coalition then. So, Iran can play its cards very smartly. It's got a chokehold on the Straits of Hormuz at the moment.
Iran, Meera Shankar, the last word from you at this point, Meera Shankar. Is this just one of those calls from Donald Trump which really is not going to see the way through? I mean, coalition of navies or countries bringing their navies forward to some difficult terrains to safeguard their vessels is not a one-off thing. It's happened in the past. But for what Trump envisions to be a coalition of navies, is this nothing but just him washing off his hands after starting what many countries did not want to happen in the way it has?
Look, we don't know what the final NATO response is going to be because they are consulting with each other on the best way to respond.
Right.
So if you see what Prime Minister Starmer has said and his energy minister also, basically that they are looking at ways in which they can help in consultation with their allies, including by sending mine sweeping or mine attacking drones and also looking at the possibilities of de-escalation. Now, that is important. You know, when they are talking about securing the Straits of Hormuz by de-escalating the conflict, or at least exploring the possibilities of de-escalation,
Right.
I think that is the best way to secure the Straits of Hormuz.
All right.
And de-escalation will happen only when the US and Israel, who started the war, unilaterally say, now we've achieved our objectives, we are, you know, pulling our forces back or pulling our military action back. They can do it.
Okay, but I think that's one thing that we are very far off from now. As of now, you even have Netanyahu say something very contradictory to what we are expecting him to say today.